He's now with more on the situation in Tunisia and across North Africa is William Lawrence. He is the president of the American Tunisian Association, and we want to thank you for coming in and joining us here. It's been 3 years since the revolution sparked there in Tunisia. Well, why are things kind of just taking forever, it seems, for the people there? I mean, they wanted the revolution, and yet it seems like it's kind of dragging along.
Well, there's a big disconnect between the revolutionary aspirations of the population and what actually happens after a revolution. One of the leading experts calls it a J-curve. After a revolution, things automatically get worse in terms of macroeconomic picture, the political picture, and it takes some time for things to consolidate. A lot of people forget that there were 7 years of rebellions after the U.S. Revolution. The French Revolution kept getting refought, republic after republic. The South Africans had their 5 worst years of violence after their revolutions. So I think the population is living through what would have automatically been a very tough period, and they're not always happy with what they're seeing.
What's been the most notable impact so far, would you say?
Of the revolution?
Change, yeah.
Well, a lot of things haven't changed. I think the most important thing is we have a political process that's begun. We have a free press. We're entering with this new agreement last Saturday, the 3rd phase of the transition, a new technocratic government that will make the passage of the new constitution possible and will lead us to a new parliament. So there's certainly been a great degree of political progress, particularly just after the last 2 weeks as part of this national dialogue. On the economic side, there's more problems.
2 opposition leaders have been murdered. There's been a lot of unrest. So kind of, if you would, walk us through the dynamic there. How unstable is it?
Well, they were assassinated, one in February and one in July. Many of those who protested the assassination in February regretted that they had left the street, because in Tunisia, like several of the other countries, the way you get things done is by street protests, and they kind of wish they'd stayed in the street to force a technocratic government to come to power. You may remember back in March, Hamedi Jebeli, the leader of the Islamist party, wanted a technocratic government. He wasn't supporting his party and had to resign. He's now the most popular person in Tunisian polls. So this has been an aspiration since March, and this idea that a technocratic government will solve all of Tunisia's problems is probably a little bit far-fetched, but it's probably better than a political government right at this important political crossroads.
Some months ago, I interviewed a woman in Tunisia who said, you know, women were kind of at the forefront in these protests, not just in Tunisia, but Egypt. And then the revolution occurs, and they're kind of left in the shadows, much like they were before. Has that been one of the most disappointing aspects of this, do you think?
Yes and no. The women's movement was very much in disarray, but largely because of their closeness to the Ben Ali regime. So that kind of disqualified them and left them in political disarray for some 6 to 8, 9 months after the revolution. On the other hand, the Islamist party is the only party that's really promoted women. So a big percentage of the parliamentarians, several dozen, are women Islamist party members. So the women who participated in the revolution, yes, they have been a little bit left aside. And of course, there's been a big debate in terms of the Constitution about women's rights. Now, the Islamist party has conceded almost all of the points. So the Constitution, which is now completed, has left a good space for women's rights, and most of those issues have been worked out.
We've got about 40 seconds. I know that's not much time, but can you kind of walk us through the Arab Spring? I mean, initially it was embraced, everyone was excited, democracy, and as you pointed out, democracy is messy. We're seeing that in Egypt. We're seeing this all over the place. What's the final takeaway of the Arab Spring?
Well, I compare it to 1848, and I won't explain in great detail why, but you had about 20 or 30 countries rise up in Europe, and we saw the outcome over decades, even though only one regime changed in 1848. And this was the moment in European history where the monarchies began to transition to democracies. So this was a sort of key moment, uprising of the peoples. And I think we have to look at this in the same way. We're going to know the true result after several decades. 18 countries rised up in ways we had never seen before. And we still didn't pay close attention to, all the repercussions. There were repercussions in many, many of these countries. Take, for example, Morocco. You have a new democratic culture in Morocco. Political parties are active. Many of the countries in the Middle East, Bahrain, you've seen a democratic awakening, which is very hard to dial back from. So I'm quite optimistic for the long term, even though it looks real bad for the short term.
Okay, William Lawrence, thank you so much for coming in. Certainly appreciate it.